Hello guys, this video is based on a comment I received in a previous video. The user asked for how to implement filtering data based on buttons. So we are going to implement the feature in the next few minutes. Let's say we have this page here. It displays a list of albums. And then at the top here, we have buttons that include a pop, hip hop, and alternative button. So what we want to do is if you click pop, we'll only show pop albums. If you click hip hop, we'll only show hip hop albums. And if you click alternative, we'll only show alternative albums. So these buttons here are displayed by this component here. So we have a genres array, and then we go through the array to display each of the genres in a button. So one of the requirements we want this feature to have is we want to be able to persist the data across refreshes. So if a user selects a pop category, for example, and then we display the pop albums, if you refresh the page, this category should still be selected and the data should be filtered. So the obvious solution to that is to store the data in the URL query string. So let's start with that. So we can change our buttons to link tags. So let's change button to a tags and then add an href attribute which will set the query string genre to the genre of the button. So let's see what this does. So this is now a link, and if you click on it, the page will refresh with the genre selected. If you click hip hop, you can see the genre is updated in the URL with the hip hop value. And if you click alternative, you can see the genre selected in the URL with that value. So one thing about this feature that I don't like is that the page refreshes every time you click on a filter. We want this to be as fast as possible, but also don't want to have to refresh the page to be able to see the selected genre that we have. So the first solution to that problem is to use a link component instead of an a tag. So let's change this to use the link component from next link. So let's save this and then try to do the same thing again. So let's click on the pop genre, the hip hop genre. You can see now the categories are updating without any page refreshes. So you might have noticed that as I'm clicking through the genres, the data is updating. So I've already hooked this up to my data fetching backend. So let me show you how I've done it. So this app is using the app router, and this is the home page. So the component that renders this home page is in the app page.jsx file. So I do the data fetching on this component, and you can see I use the SWR hook to fetch the data on the client side. So to be able to get the filters, what I've done is gotten the value of search params object here, and then initialized a new URL search params object with those search params, and then passed it to my API that does the filtering. So this search params is just the value of this query string here converted into an object. Let me log it so that you can see how it looks like. Params. So if we open the Chrome console, you can see that the params is an object. So we selected the alternative genre. You can see the value of the genre is an alternative. If we select a different category, you can see the params is serialized into an object. So what I'm doing is serializing this back to a query string so that I can send it to my API route here. So let's go back to the feature we were implementing. So the first thing I want to add here is that as you change the genres, I want the correct button to be highlighted according to the genre that you have picked. So we need a way to be able to get the active value from the URL string. So what we can do is use a Next.js hook called use search params. Let's log this in the console to see what it looks like. That gets us an error. Use search params only works in client components. So what they're saying is we should add a use client directive at the top of our file for this to work. So that should fix our problem. So if you look at the console, it looks like a URL search params object. So to get the active genre, we can add a new variable called active is equals to params.get genre, and then make the default value be an empty string. So in the class name prop, we can do a check. If the genre is the same as the active value, then we can add an active class. Otherwise, use an empty string. So with that, if we change the genre, you can see the button stays active. So the user is easily able to see what genre is currently selected. And if you refresh the page, the correct value is still selected, and you can see the data is still filtered correctly. So another feature we want to add here is being able to remove the filters completely. So when you select a filter, for example, we want to be able to toggle it off if you click it twice, so that there is a way where we can display all of the albums without any of the filters selected. So the first thing we want to do is to make this href an object that we can easily manipulate. So instead of a string, we can pass in an object as a href and then add a query parameter which is equal to the value of the genre. So to implement toggling, we can add a helper function that does it. So let's call it toggle query. So this function receives a key and a value. So what we want our toggle query function to do is check the params for this key, and if it's there, remove it. If it's not there, add the key. And after doing all that, we want to return the new params. So to be able to do that, we need to convert this params object into a format that we can easily manipulate. So we can say query is equals to object.fromEntries the params object. So the query is now a raw object with a key string and a value string. So with that, we can easily check if the query has the value, delete the value. Otherwise, add the value. And then finally, return the new query object. So let's call this, instead of setting the query here manually, let's call our toggle query function. So the key is the genre, and then the value is the actual value of the genre. So we can also log the value of query here just to see how it changes. So we should still be able to click around the categories and they will all change. So when we try to toggle the alternative toggle, for example, looks like it's not working as expected. So toggling off doesn't really work. So what's interesting about this is if we add a path name prop to the link and then try toggling again, you can see that it now works. So if you look at the URL, you can see when I click on the pop category, for example, and then I click again on the pop category, I turn off the toggles altogether. So I can toggle a category on and off. So to be able to clear the query string, you need to also make sure that you pass the path name prop to the href attribute of the link component. So this is one of those Next.js features that can really frustrate you if you don't know how to use them properly. So now that we got toggling working, there is another feature that I want us to add, and that is having to toggle multiple values at once. So let's say that we want to show albums of specific artists, for example. So let's say we have an artist's array with a name. So let's say Taylor Swift and an ID. So the ID in our case could be their Spotify ID, for example. We can also add another artist, say Drake, with their Spotify ID, and maybe J. Cole also with their Spotify ID. So what we want this feature to do is if you select one artist, then we show the albums of that artist. But you also want to be able to select multiple artists at once. So let's display these filters just below our genre filters. So let's update this artist logic a bit. So we want all the artists to be stored in one query string called artists, so that when you click an artist name, the value should be added to the artist's query string. So for example, we clicked on Taylor Swift and you can see Taylor Swift's album. And then when you click on Drake, so Drake should be added to there. We should be able to see Taylor Swift's and Drake's albums instead of just changing it to Drake only. So what we can do is implement a new function that does that. So let's maybe call it toggle multiple query. That should be able to do that. So let's implement it. So it has the same parameters as the toggle query function, the key and the value. So we want our function to do 4 things. So if the key is in the query, we check if the value is in the array of that query's value. If the value is in the array, we need to remove it. If the array is empty after removing the value, we need to remove the key completely. So delete it from the query string. And if the value is not in the array at all, we need to add it. So let's implement the logic here. So the first thing, we do the same thing we did above here, then get and convert the params to an object. So we are treating the values of this key as an array. So you can say the values are a query key. So maybe if it's there, we can split it. So we are treating the value as an array, which is stored as a string separated by a comma. So we can't really store an array in the query string. So that's why we are converting it into a string separated by commas. So to read the value, we just split it by the comma, and then we get an array of strings. So if the value is there, then convert it into an array of strings. Otherwise, we use an empty array. So let's implement this first requirement. So let's change this into a temporary variable that we can overwrite the value of. If our value is in the array, make sure to remove it. Otherwise, we add it. So that takes care of this. If the value is in the array, remove it. And then if it's not in the array, we add it. So that takes care of these first cases. So let's take care of this. So if the array is empty after removing the value, remove the key. Otherwise, we add the key. So this should take care of that too. So this should take care of toggling all of the values for us. And then finally, we can log the query and then return it. So that completes our toggle multiple query function. So let's see if this function works. So let's start from an empty slate there with no query string at all. So if we click on Taylor Swift, we should be able to see Taylor Swift's albums. And then if we click on Drake, we should be able to see Taylor Swift, yes, and Drake's albums. And then if we toggle Taylor Swift off, we should only be able to see Drake's albums. Let's also work on highlighting these so that we know which toggle is on and which one is off. So we can have an active artists variable that should get the value from the query string, and then during comparison here we can do an active artists dot includes this artist dot id. So if we save this, you can see now Drake is highlighted and we are showing Drake's albums. So if we select J. Cole, then Drake and J. Cole will be highlighted, and then we are now showing albums for J. Cole and Drake. And then if we select Taylor Swift too, you can see that all albums are shown for the three of them, for J. Cole, Taylor Swift and Drake. And then we can also toggle it off. You can remove Taylor Swift and remove Drake, and then you can only show J. Cole's albums. So that should be it. We have been able to implement toggling of categories, all with all our state stored in the URL, and we are accessing all values using the use search params hook only. And also remember that we are accessing the values of the query parameter in our page.jsx file via the search params variable that is automatically passed in by Next.js. So I hope this answers the question on how to implement toggling in your UI. I hope my implementation was simple enough for you to understand. So if you have any ideas on maybe simplifying this more, I would like to hear them in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.